Welcome back to the final episode in this series covering the road to economic depression in the United States. In this episode, we will talk about the unequal distribution of wealth being one of the 6 causes of the Great Depression. While statistics showed that Americans were more prosperous than ever during the 1920s, most of the country's wealth remained in the hands of a few people at the top of the economic pyramid. As the decade wore on, the gap between rich and poor grew wider, and the distribution of wealth grew increasingly unequal. In 1929, the Federal Trade Commission reported that 1% of the American population possessed over 59% of the country's wealth. Moreover, experts estimated that over 60% of U.S. families lived on or below the minimum subsistence level of $2,000 a year, with many African Americans, Latinos, and other non-white populations were even poorer. From 1920 to 1929, the average American saw his net income increase by a modest 9%. In comparison, the income of rich Americans rose a whopping 75%. In short, the rich were getting richer, the poor were getting poorer, and this maldistribution of wealth had a significant impact on the stability of the U.S. economy. Like their agricultural counterparts, American industrial workers struggled to survive in the 1920s. Many companies replaced workers with machines that could produce goods at a faster, cheaper rate. For example, in 1929, 1,100 workers lost their jobs after a Connecticut rubber factory mechanized its operations. That same year, 35,000 musicians were replaced by machine music in the nation's theaters. In addition, corporations rarely passed their profits onto the worker in the form of higher wages. Instead, they kept worker wages low and used the extra profits to expand their facilities and increase the production of goods. As a result, American industrial workers grew impoverished as the nation's farmers. They grew as impoverished as the nation's farmers. Banks and businesses tried to encourage consumer spending despite this by allowing people to buy things on credit. But this led to Americans falling deeper and deeper into debt as they purchased items they could not afford and paid high rates of interest on them. By 1929, many Americans could not even afford the basic staples of life, let alone the types of goods American industries were producing. A small handful of wealthy Americans could not make up for an entire nation's lack of purchasing power. Sales dropped, and companies began to founder and fail. The Great Depression, the worst depression of the 20th century, lasted well into the 1930s. It arose from a series of complex and interconnected conditions: the failure of trickle-down economics, the decline of international commerce, the overvaluation of stocks, unregulated and imprudent banking practices, the widespread overproduction of goods, the collapse of agriculture, the unequal distribution of wealth, and the average American's corollary lack of purchasing power. The Depression dramatically changed Americans' lives and society for decades afterward. Thanks very much for watching.